Hi, I'm Bob Moore, and welcome to the Landmarks tutorial part 2. If you did not see part 1 of this tutorial, make sure you click on the link that's in the description where we'll talk about how we built the component that looks very similar to what you're seeing on this screen here without this tab bar down at the bottom. So what we're going to do is we're going to be basing our part 2 on chapter 3 of the SwiftUI Landmarks tutorial that covers app design and layout, composing complex interfaces and working with UI controls in the SwiftUI tutorial. Let's take a look at the new SwiftUI example in Xcode. We're looking at a preview canvas here. Notice at the bottom of the screen there are two tabs, one for a featured view and one for a list view. The list view looks familiar, but if I tap on the featured tab, the landmarks are now displayed in a series of rows that are sorted by the type of landmark. So we have lakes, mountains, and rivers. When I tap on an image, it brings up a detail view that looks exactly like the one in the list control, and once again, I can make this a favorite or not a favorite. I can notice that it says featured up here on the back button, and that will come back to the featured panel. And when I go to list, then the list view comes back up. Again, you've got your filtering here. Go back to featured and detail view. Now, the interesting thing is at this point, there's a number of things that the user could do. The user could click on featured. They can come back and click on this. It doesn't do anything, but you can go to list. Now, notice I'm in the detail view and I click on list. So now I come back to this list, and I might say, oh, let me go back to featured. Now, in this application, they're using a separate detail view for each list control. I'm going to change that behavior because I found this to be confusing. For example, watch, I'll go to list and I'll say pick Turtle Rock. So now landmarks is referencing the Turtle Rock detail view, but if I go to featured, Lake McDonald is featured. I found this confusing. I'm going to change this, and it's not what we'll model in alpha will be if you select either of these buttons. So if you go to list and a detail view is up, it's going to show you the list. Or if you go to featured and a detail view is up, it's going to show you featured. So we'll have to keep track of the state so that we can understand, well, what is active at any given time. But other than that, we'll model this exactly the way it's been done here in SwiftUI. Okay, so here we are in Alpha Anywhere, and this is the final component that we're going to end up building. But I wanted to take a look at this to see, well, what do we have to actually add to the existing component to add the featured tab and the featured panel card and so on. So what we need to do is add in the panel navigator a footer with a couple of buttons, one for the list and one for featured. When featured is displayed, we're going to bring into view the featured panel card, and it consists of a static image on the top. Then there's 1, 2, 3 lists, and they're all filtered on the type of landmark that it is, whether it's lakes, mountains, or rivers. These scroll independently in a horizontal fashion, and the whole panel card also scrolls up and down. We've got a featured tag here. When we tap on a landmark, a detail view comes into view. This now says featured. If I click on list, it's going to go back to the list. Or if I click on featured, it's going to go back to the featured panel card. So what I'm doing here is, if you're in a detail view and you go back to featured, that'll work okay. If you're in a detail view and you now click on list, it's going to go back to the list control. And then if I was to go back to featured, so it goes back to the featured panel card. Notice that the detail view is we dispose of the detail view anytime you click on any of these buttons here. And I think that this just makes a lot more sense. So that if I want a list, I get a list. If I want featured, I get the featured, and so on. So we're going to take a look at exactly what I need to do in order to build this component. We'll start right from where we left off at the end of part 1. Okay, so from within Alpha Anywhere, we're going to go ahead and open up the tutorials workspace, which is where we created the Landmarks 1 project. And what I'm going to do is create a new project. I like to keep things separated like this so that I can always return to an exact state of a given project. So what I'm going to do is create a new project, and let's call this Landmarks 2. So now we're in our Landmarks 2 project. We can see that over here. And I've got to set some properties for the project. So if I go into project properties, these are the defaults. So it's set up with the alpha project style, and it's going to load jQuery core and jQuery UI and so on. I also need my Google Maps API for this project. So something we've added, this is fairly new, is you can now import from another project. So in this case, I want to import from Landmarks 1. You'll notice this changes to iOS 7. It's no longer loading the jQuery stuff, and my Google Maps keys are in there. So I'm all set to go. If you don't have the Landmarks 1 project, you can certainly download that, or you can just go in and manually change these runtime properties, set the style to iOS 7. There's no reason to load jQuery core or jQuery UI, and then make sure to enter in your Google Maps API keys, and you'll be all set. Okay, from there, the next thing we want to do is we can just import the zip file that you will have downloaded. That will have been, those assets will have been listed in the video's description. So make sure you download the assets zip file for this. I'm going to just go ahead and right click. I'm going to import, and we'll select, it's called Landmarks _ chapter 2 assets.zip. Highlight that, open it up, and we're going to import everything in. And there we go. So this is what it should look like. We've got a CSS folder. You can certainly come in here and take a look at the custom CSS that I've generated and the style tweaks. You can look at all the images that are used within the project. This license folder is Apple's license file, since we are using assets that were generated by Apple. They're allowing us to do that here in their license file, so you might want to review that. And then we've got Landmarks JSON. That is our this is our data file. So this is where we're pulling data from. This is all covered in the Landmarks 1 tutorial. And then what I've done here is I've included a number of different components. And we'll start out with a Landmarks 2 start, and then we'll go to step 2, where we're going to add some features panel card and a control bar, and then we're going to add some lists, and then we're going to add some more lists, and then we're going to have a final. So what will happen here is the JavaScript changes in these components, and rather than have you watch me type all that stuff out, I decided to do this and complete all of these components in these phases so that we could just look at them and study what I've changed. It just makes it a lot easier. So let's start off with the one that we start with, Landmarks 2 _ start. And this just represents the state of the component. This would be when we, this is the state that it was in when we finished Landmarks 1. So let's just look at working preview here and see what we're starting out with. So we're just starting out with this one list. Let me just make this a little smaller. I'm sorry, I cannot fit it on my screen within this aspect ratio if it's bigger. And you'll notice, on the bottom there is, we don't have the footer in there with the buttons and so on. So we've just got these rows, this list, the images come up, we can favorite things, we can go back, we can filter the list on favorites and so on. That's our starting point. And if you take a look at the JavaScript here, you'll see that this is the starting point for the JavaScript, and this will change in all the given components. So let's just close that out and open up the next one, which is step 2. And so step 2 is a little bit different. Let's look at it in working preview. So we can see now we've got there is a footer, and that's in the panel navigator, and it's got a couple of buttons. And here's our list. This will behave the same way as it always did. And when we click on featured, a featured panel card comes into view. There isn't a list here, but there's a static image and static text here. So this is sort of the starting point for the stuff that we're going to be adding. And you'll notice that this works and that these buttons are styled the way that they need to be. So this is a good point to see, well, what's going on here. So let's take a look at it. So what I did was I added a panel footer that's basically in the panel navigator. So it will show whenever the featured panel car, the detailed panel car, or landmarks is shown. And in there is a control bar. So if we look at the control bar, you'll notice that it includes a button list. And if we look at the button list, you can see that I added 2 buttons, one with a value of featured and one with a value of list. And that I've specified SVG icons. One's a star and one's a bulleted list. Specified the size at 30. It's important to notice that I've also got a variable named selected button, and we're passing in value and data. These are default values right here. We can go look at the button if you'd like. It's featured. Here's our icon, and there's our value. Okay, so this value is important because it's what we're going to use to figure out what button was really clicked. Okay. So let's go ahead and get rid of that and then take a look at a couple of the other settings that are important. I've got a button list on click item action that's set up. I've got fill width is checked here. Keep button keep pressed is set to true. I've also set the button layout for the image above the text, and a button class name. I added a custom class that I designed called icon gray text. And so that's going to be the standard state of the button. And then when you press the button, it will be icon blue text. So this is consistent with the iOS application that we are trying to model. And if I jump into actions, here you can see the button list on click action, and this is the JavaScript that's associated with it. So here, this constant selected, we are looking at, and it tells us this data is the data object for the control bar. And then remember, I named the button itself selected button, and then I'm getting the value of that button. So selected is going to be, it's either going to be featured or it's going to be list. And then we're calling the commit and load selected panel card and passing selected to it. That's what we're doing there. And then in terms of the control bar layout, let's click on that tab. You'll notice I have a custom line layout, and let's go look at what that is. And what I did there was I just clicked on insert control bar item and then button list. So we've just added the button list into the control bar. That's all we have to do there, and that is what drives that control bar. So let's go take a look at it again quick. And so that is what's causing all of this to happen right here. Now let's go to the JavaScript function, and let's take a look at the function I'm calling, and that is commit and load selected panel card. So if we look at commit and load selected panel card, we pass in selected, and here we check if it's featured, then we're going to activate the featured panel card, else we'll load up the landmarks panel card. But notice I'm calling a commit data function here, and the reason is that the detail view could have been present, and a change could have been made to the detail view anytime that those buttons are clicked. So you got to make sure that you commit the data. Otherwise, we're going to run into problems there. So if we take a look at the commit data function, and I can easily find that right in the list here. And here we'll see I'm logging. This is for debug purposes, console log, and then I go get a pointer to the landmarks list. Remember, the landmarks list is driving everything with this detail view. And if something's been selected, so if a row has been selected, then I update. If nothing's been selected, there's no reason to update at all. So that's what's going on there. So let's go back to controls. That covers the control bar and the functionality that's assigned to it. And then I added a featured panel card. You'll see that right here. That includes a static text called featured, and notice I have assigned a class called title text. So if you'd like to see what that is, if you click on this class button over here, select the class, and you can view the CSS definition here. And then from here, the title text is going to be down at the bottom. And here you can see I'm setting the padding, top 30 pixel. I'm setting the opacity. And then there's a transform and translate. So we're going to make sure that this is in view. Remember, I'm moving this, and with the title text move class, I'm translating it and animating it out of view. Again, this is something that we're doing, and we're modeling it after the SwiftUI app. So we want to make sure that we do that. But those are the classes that are being used there. And that's in the panel card header. And then here we've got an image. In this case, I'm just using the Turtle Rock image, and I've set some styling so that it's a certain, its width is 100%, its height is 200 pixels, and so on. So that's all we're doing at this point in this panel card. And again, let's take a quick look at it and just look at the functionality that we have. And we can switch out the different views. We can still call up the detail view. We can jump over to featured here and go back to list. And this functionality is all working as we would like. Now, notice right now that this, the favorites text is essentially it's disappeared. And the reason is because of the way we moved around this the component. We went in, we had the detail view up, clicked on featured. So this class, the move class, never got removed. So we have to be careful of that, and we'll show you how we fix that in the next segment. Okay, moving on. Let's take a look at the SwiftUI application that we're trying to model. And let's go back to this list view, so then we can go to our featured view, and we can see that we've got 3 different lists sorted by lakes, mountains, and rivers, and then we can scroll all of these in a horizontal fashion. If we click on the image, then the detail view comes up, and this says featured here. Okay, so let's see how we're going to do that in Alpha Anywhere. Okay, so let's go ahead and load landmarks to step 3, add feature list. And let's look at what we've got here when we're done. So open up working preview, and again we'll go to featured, and now we can see that we've got this list that scrolls, and then we've got this horizontal scroller here. When I click on an image, nothing's going to happen because I don't have a handler in there for that yet. But let's take a look at how this was accomplished. So in the featured panel card here, you'll see that I've added a list, and I'm calling that list lakes. I've set the height to 175, the width to 100%. And I've got a label called lakes, and that's positioned above. And if you look in here, you'll see that. So we'll see there's our label, and these are our lists. We've got the image, and then we've got the name of the landmark. So let's go look at that. In the list properties, we'll take a look at it and notice that the data source is a JSON file. It is landmarks.json. That is exactly the same way we did it for the landmarks list in our first lesson. Notice that there's a filter here, and the filter is on the category of lakes. Okay, so category equals lakes, and then we're going to return the ID. So that's important because that's how we're going to select the row in the landmarks list, because we're going to be using one detail view for all of these lists. So it's an efficient way of doing this. If we go look at list properties here, you can see I'm assigning a class of SwiftList, and that's a CSS class I defined. We can certainly look at that right here. Look at the CSS definition. It's going to be down near the bottom here. So I'm just setting border none, border bottom to 1 pixel solid. So that's all I'm doing there. And let's see. Allow null selection is checked. Is there anything else here? Yeah, this is important. Drag scroll direction is the x-axis. We just want a horizontal scroller there. And we're using a freeform layout type. And let's go take a look at that list layout. So here we can see our freeform layout type. We're using the data for the image. So we're displaying the image. We're setting its width and its border radius and so on. That's our image that displays, and then we want to show the name of the landmark. So that's the template that we're using. And the other thing that I have added at this stage of this component is I need to track I need to know based on when the detail view comes up, which panel card actually called it up, because I have to adjust the back button text, and I have to know what panel card to return to from the detail view. So what I need to do is I need to track globally, essentially, the state. So what I've done is in the client-side events, and I do this often, I'll create a global object, and this is called this app. And so whenever I need to access properties, at any time within a component, I'll use this global object and then assign my properties to it. So in this case, I've got a property called feature flag, and it's just set to false. And then we'll toggle this flag based on whether or not the feature view was called or whether the list view was called. And we'll do that. If we go look at the JavaScript functions in the, let's see, I believe that is here in the commit and load selected panel card. So you commit the data. Now here I'm doing a reset title state. That's actually to make sure that the proper CSS class is assigned to the title to make sure it's in view, because it could have been animated out of view. And here you'll notice that if featured was selected, this app feature flag is true, and over here this app feature flag is set to false. Okay, so I will show you how I use this in the next section when we load the next component up. But I wanted you to see how that was done, and it was done right in here. So again, this one, if I run it, it's not going to bring up a detail view when I click on the on anything, but we'll change that when we load the next component up. And next we'll load the landmarks to step 4, add mountains and rivers list component. So let's get that. And so what I've done here is added 2 more lists, one that's filtered on mountains and one that's filtered on rivers. And we just changed the labels of those. That's really all we did there. But let's go look at lakes first. And let's go look at, I've put a click handler on this list, and let's go look at that. So that's going to be on select. So when you select one of those images in the list, the first thing I'm going to do is get the ID of the of whatever you selected in the list, and then I'm going to pass that ID to set detail view contents and show. Let's go look at that in the JavaScript functions. And set detail view contents and show is right here. So there's the ID. Notice I'm getting a pointer to the landmarks list object. Then I set the value to the ID. Okay, that's basically just selects the row in that list. And then I call show details panel card, which is right up here. And so what we're doing here is the set detail panel card will it will move the title text it up and away, so it resizes it and then animates it up into the corner, and then we set the detail panel card active. Okay, next let's go back to the different lists that we added. And what I did was, all I did was duplicate this control. So I just said duplicate control, and I did it twice. And then I just went in and changed the list properties. So I changed the label to mountains. I changed the filter to mountains in this case. All right. And the next one, exactly the same thing. Just changed it to rivers here. And I didn't have to change the JavaScript or anything else. It was a really easy way of just adding all these different lists, and they all call back to the landmarks list to bring up the detail view. So that worked out really well. So let's take a look at where we are with this. So in working preview, I'll go ahead and click on featured, and we see we've got all of our different lists, and they're all filtered the way we would expect. If I click on one of the images, it brings up our detail view as we would like, and then when I click on essentially the back button, in this case it said featured, notice that it brings us back to the list. It didn't bring us back to featured, and notice that this is featured is highlighted, but that's not where we are right now. So we still have some problems we need to deal with. There are other things that could happen here as well. So if I clicked on a list and brought up a detail view, and then clicked on, say, featured, and then went back to lists, notice that the text has been animated out of view. So we're not adjusting the class that we need to bring that back into view. So there's a number of issues that still need to be resolved. We'll take a look at that when I bring up the next component. And to wrap things up here, let's launch the Landmarks 2 Step 5, the final one. And let's take a look at what we've changed here. What I'm going to do is take a look at the details panel card. In the control bar is where the back button would be. And so what I'm going to do here is, instead of calling the show landmarks panel card, which I've commented out, I'm going to call the show parent panel card, because you really don't know. It could be the featured panel card, or it could be the landmarks list panel card. So let's go take a look at what that does. So let's take a look in our JavaScript functions, and we're going to look at show parent panel card, which is right here. And what I'm doing is I'm resetting the title state. We'll look at that function in a second. And then if this app, remember that's the global flag that I set, if this app, the feature flag is set, then we go to and bring up the featured panel card. Otherwise, we'll bring up the landmarks panel card. The reset title state is going to animate the title into view, and so here's our reset title state. And notice that I'm getting a pointer to, I've got title text on both panel cards, so I just make sure to remove the move CSS class. That always will animate that back into view. And then when I bring up the detail view, I've got to make sure to call animate and move title text, and that'll just move it out of the way. So I've made a change in the show details panel card right here, animate and move title text. That should solve all the problems that we identified there. So let's take a look at working preview. And let's see where we are here. Again, let me bring up the smaller image so we can fit it all in here. If I click on my featured and click on a item and I go back, I now come back to featured, and featured's animated into view. I can bring up the detail view from featured and now go click on list. List will show up. And if I go back to featured, then featured is back at the featured panel card. I can go to list to bring up the detail view there. Go back, it's going to be in the landmarks list, which we would expect. Featured will also always come back to featured. So right now we've got the behavior, the exact behavior we were looking for. And at this point, we've done a very good job of modeling this iOS Swift application in alpha. We've gotten all the functionality that we wanted, and so I think this just proves that you can really build something that looks great, that is fairly easy to build and understand in alpha anywhere, and quite capable. So I hope you've learned something here today, and thanks for sticking in there with me. And until next time, this is Bob Moore signing off.